Hello and welcome to Electronic Health Records. We are covering chapter 13, which is our last chapter in this textbook. Yay! And we're going to be talking about implementation and evaluation of EHR systems. If you want to follow along in the book, we're starting on page 352 with our little introduction here. And we're talking about how basically with ARA and the HITECH Act of 2009, the adoption of EHRs was just completely accelerated, and you had so many more physician offices and healthcare facilities jumping on the EHR bandwagon. Again, most of that happened around 2014, 2015 because of meaningful use criteria. And if they met, then they would receive, some monies back to help offset the cost. Because again, these EHRs are expensive. So in this chapter, we're going to be talking about EHR implementation, the best ways to do that. And then if you look over at 353, we have a table there. And these are our levels of EHR certification. It talks about how the different levels of certification are based on the complexity of the EHR system. And so we see that we have basic EHR without clinician notes. We have basic EHR with clinician notes. And then we have a comprehensive EHR. And you can see by the dots placed in the functions that your comprehensive EHR, it checks all the buttons. I mean, everything. It has all the bells and whistles. And so a lot of times your comprehensive EHR adoption, it's going to require that all of these functions be implemented in all of your clinical units. So you've got your diagnostic images that you can view. You can view all your consultation reports. You have the decision support that we talked about in chapter 11, the clinical guidelines, clinical reminders, your drug-drug interactions, your drug-lab interactions. You have your drug dosing support and so forth. So your comprehensive EHR, again, it's the best of the best. All right, so let's talk about actually implementing an EHR. So this is a time-consuming, labor-intensive project, but with proper planning, you can get these implemented with few disruptions. But if the planning is not started long in advance, then the process is going to be a challenge, and I can attest to this. When we implemented an EHR system at North Mississippi Medical Center, we really, truly did start meeting at least a year before the implementation date. And that was just strictly from the HIM side. What documents needed to be sent to our document imaging system for the legal health record storage. What pieces of information or what data elements needed to be in each document. Because again, we were the experts in which document had to have what information. So they came to us and we planned and we planned and we planned. We had at least every other week meetings until implementation, and then we continue to meet afterwards. So again, planning is absolutely critical to implementing your EHR system. All right, so it says planning stages of EHR implementation involve a series of initial steps. The first step is to determine a facility's readiness to change from paper to electronic records. Once that factor is determined, a facility needs to set goals and establish a steering committee to lay the groundwork and move the EHR planning process forward. Now, the initial steps are assessing readiness, setting your goals, establishing your steering committee, and then assigning that project manager. And so we're going to cover each one of those as we continue on through our slides. Now, organizations should be advised to analyze their clinical, financial, and administrative computer applications, their technical capabilities, and their staffing resources. They should also examine their reporting needs, such as hospital utilization, gross patient revenue, and emergency visits. Several other factors, such as current technology, technical support, and facility operations must also be considered. Lastly, the organization's culture of change management and process improvement must be reviewed. This factor is critical to a facility's successful EHR adoption. To that end, a facility must understand the distinction between implementation and adoption. The installation of your EHR system is one thing, but the willingness of your staff to embrace it and use it, that's a totally different animal there. So consequently, adoption may take more time and effort than all of the other elements of your implementation. All right, so moving on to setting goals. So once we've assessed our readiness, the organization has to identify and establish goals. Although these goals may differ among healthcare facilities, many organizations share some key objectives. So one thing you want to do, of course, is reduce your medical errors. Medical errors are still one of the biggest things in hospitals today. You want to increase your revenue. Who wouldn't, bring in more money in, because maybe with the EHR you can get more clear documentation and you're, able to code appropriately because you have all of the information that you need to maximize your reimbursement or optimize your reimbursement. Third, improve operational efficiency. Why would you not want to improve your efficiency as you operate? Make it easier for nurses, make it easier for physicians. Okay, then supervise compliance and improve reporting. So both of those, again, are huge goals of an EHR system that's coming in. All right, going down to establish a committee. To move the EHR implementation process forward, a healthcare facility must create a cross-disciplinary steering committee whose members represent groups with a direct role or involvement in the proposed EHR system. A typical steering committee is composed of healthcare providers, nurses, health information professionals, administrators, financial staff, and staff members of other integral departments. The committee is led by a chair or co-chairs, and these are usually clinicians, and is tasked with examining factors such as operational issues with current technology infrastructure. The members then come to a consensus as to what changes need to be made to the infrastructure and draw up a plan that outlines the steps needed for successful migration to an EHR system. The committee also examines policies and procedures in support of EHR staff and resources with regard to implementation and maintenance. And during the implementation process, the committee should meet weekly to address implementation issues or challenges. And sometimes you have subcommittees that might also meet weekly, or depending on what's going on, if there's something super important going on, they may meet more than once a week. All right, moving on to our last step of initial steps, and this is assigning our project manager. Now, it is highly recommended that starting early in the vendor selection process, that the facility hires or assigns a project manager to help implement the EHR. The project manager may be an internal employee of the healthcare facility or an external or contracted staff person. And we're going to talk about the differences in an internal and an external, and then we'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each. Okay, so in hiring an internal project manager, you have some advantages. Of course, this person understands your organization. They understand the culture. They understand the structure. They have a vested interest in making this implementation a success, because guess what? Once it's implemented, they're still there. They're still a part of the organization. So if it falls apart, they look bad. But if it is successful, then they look really good. And again, this individual is on site, readily available. And then one risk for that individual being an internal project manager is that they may lack objectivity in decision making. So they may not want to think outside of the box because they've worked there so long and we've always done it this way. So sometimes they're not able to step out of their box and make those big picture decisions because they have been placed in that box for so long. Okay, so let's talk about an external project manager. Sometimes this person may be someone that you do hire that's, a third party, or sometimes your project manager is with the company that you're purchasing your EHR for. So, for example, North Mississippi Health Services, when they implemented Allscripts Sunrise Clinical Manager back in 2012, the project manager was an Allscripts employee. Now, we had a point person or a project person from North Mississippi Health Services, but the person actually driving the implementation was an external project manager from Allscripts. Now, hiring an external project manager, because they're neutral and they can provide that objectivity in implementing the migration plan. You know, they don't have those set, ways that, oh, well, we've always done it this way, because they haven't. They haven't been there. They don't work there. So you've got some advantages there, of course. Now, a risk. They don't know about your organization. They're going to have to take that time to learn the culture, learn the structure, learn the stakeholders, get the processes down. If they're not a person with a clinical background, if they're someone with a business background, and then they need to learn those clinical workflows to make an EHR system work for your staff. So it says in the book, in addition, an external project manager is typically hired to complete the migration process and is unavailable after that time to manage any adoption issues. So what that's kind of saying is these people get the system in place and get everything up and going, and then they're gone. They're out the door. They're not going to be there to handhold your staff so that your staff learn to love the system or learn to use the system. So that could kind of also be a disadvantage as well, whereas your internal project manager, they're going to remain a part of your organization. And they, again, have that vested interest in making implementation a success, and not only implementation, but again, the adoption. Now, let's talk about qualities of a project manager. So when selecting your project manager, you want to make sure that they are skilled in communication. They can facilitate, whether that's meetings or, other things going on with vendors. They can negotiate, they know how to delegate, and they are good at follow-up. A lot of times you find that they may be great at everything, but they never follow up, and the work just doesn't get done because there's no one there to check up on things and make sure things are still moving. And the other thing is they don't necessarily have to be a clinician, but they need to have a good understanding of healthcare and clinical information. They need to be able to wrap their head around clinical workflow. So what are their responsibilities? Well, the project manager handles all issues related to the selection and implementation of an EHR system. Now, with North Mississippi Health Services, they didn't help with the selection. They became our project manager after we chose the system. So most of the time, your internal project manager will be the ones that will do the selection, or if you actually hire someone to come in and be an external project manager, they may help with the selection. Now, the issues may be a transition from paper to electronic records. There may be a change of one EHR system to another. You may have different approaches to performing a job, or the frustration that stems from lack of technical skills by employees or patients. The project manager should be able to visualize the end results of an organization's goals, be detailed at task monitoring, and have working knowledge of what can and cannot be accomplished. He or she will work closely with the information technology department and the vendor implementation team. Lastly, your project manager, along with the vendor implementation team, must identify the roles of the healthcare facility employees, create a training schedule, and monitor the training progress of the staff. All right, so let's go on over to 356 and let's talk about a migration plan. Now, in addition to preliminary analysis, the healthcare facility should create a migration plan. A migration plan provides the framework to identify the basic steps that must be completed during the transition from paper health records or an existing electronic system to an EHR. And so you've got 6 steps here that are your key migration plan steps. So first, you need to identify requirements. So ask a facility to identify the scope of the project and user needs. Then you want to create a design. This provides a blueprint that illustrates the transition process from your paper health record to the new EHR system. Third step is to analyze current systems and the processes in place. The analyze step is going to examine how the healthcare facility currently uses its healthcare records and performs tasks. A workflow analysis will be useful during this step, and we'll talk about that later in this section. An environmental analysis is the process of evaluating the people and the process of workflow in a healthcare organization, and it's part of the analysis step. Now, our fourth step is to test the functionality of the new EHR system. This type of testing focuses on several aspects, such as the way system modules work, the system load, or reliability of the system. Our fifth step is to create a timeline for implementation. This timeline, which often will look like a Gantt chart, we talked about Gantt charts in performance improvement. It may include schedules, resources, and dependencies. Project managers schedule tasks for implementation, allocating resources, and creating those dependencies. Dependencies are the tasks that have to be performed before the next task can actually happen. Project managers often use programs like Microsoft Project to create a timeline. And then finally, we have ongoing maintenance of the new EHR system. It has to be considered and planned for. Now, we have some key considerations of a migration plan. Organizations that invest in the appropriate amount of time and effort into a viable and sustainable migration plan will reap the rewards of successful EHR implementation. But a facility's migration plan must also be fluid. There will be additional specialty software applications, such as those used by pharmacy, rehab, or occupational therapy departments, that require integration into the EHR system. Healthcare providers and staff must assess and add those applications to the implementation plan as needed. All right, so let's talk about those workflow analysis at the bottom of 357. So this is an important assessment to conduct when selecting an EHR system. A workflow analysis reviews how the organization currently functions and how the paper records are used for patient care. Workflow analysis should be considered for all back office, front office, health information management, and provider processes. Multiple stakeholders will be engaged in this process, and key internal stakeholders that comprehensively understand the flow of information in the facility are essential to an accurate analysis. Stakeholders may vary by facility, but generally include health information managers, physicians, nurses, IT, and other department managers. Now, I can tell you that from my perspective, this is not when we implemented our actual electronic health record, but when we were implementing our document imaging system, we were moving from paper to electronic. So the processes that happened in HIM that currently happened on paper were moving to a computer environment. So chart analysis, looking for history and physicals, looking for signatures, looking for missing documents. That was done on paper, and it was going to move into the computer world. So we had to map out that whole plan. We had to know, what documents do you look for first? Because we could set up our tabs and we could put the documents in the order that they looked at them in paper. So if they looked for a discharge summary first, we could make sure that was the first document that would come up in their list. If they looked at the history and physical second, then we could put that second. So we did that workflow analysis for each process within the HIM department. So chart analysis, we did it with our coding staff, and then scanning staff not so much, but we did do workflow analysis for them on how they would prep their charts for scanning and then complete the scanning and quality control processes. All right, so let's talk about part of how we're going to go about checking all the steps in our process. And we did talk about this in performance improvement as well. But flow charts are commonly used in workflow analysis. If you look at figure 13.2 on page 358, this is a flow chart mapping of an emergency room workflow process. So the start, which this isn't not a true flow chart because it's not using the same diagram symbols. But the patient comes into the emergency room, triage and vital signs are checked, then the patient's registered, then they're going to be decided the priority based on their triage, then they're going to go for examination, treatment, or observation, and then you've got a decision technically. Are you going to discharge them? Are they going to be admitted? Or are you going to transfer them? So your chart is going to actually help identify locations of breakdowns, insufficiencies, or bottlenecks. And so when you have the information and knowledge from a flow chart, then the facility will be able to isolate the challenges to the flow of patient information, and then they can find a vendor that can address these workflow problems before final implementation of your EHR system. Now, as far as collecting information, each facility begins the task of gathering data for a workflow analysis. It has to determine its approach. So they can either put together a cross-disciplinary team, they can assign staff members to perform their job requirements and then analyze how the work is completed. They can conduct internal analysis rather than working through a vendor, or they can assign overall responsibility to a project manager or to an internal staff person. Another approach that some facilities use to collect data is to ask departments or staff members to review how a patient is treated by stepping into the patient's shoes. This role reversal helps them to analyze the interaction between the patient and the healthcare facility from the moment he or she checks in or the moment they leave the facility. Another technique for collecting information is to ask staff members to write detailed descriptions of their tasks, actions, and sequences. And so some questions that get asked may be, what are the tasks or steps involved in the process? Are there variations to these processes? Are there acceptable reasons for process variations by your department? Who completes the process? How long does the process take? Where are the bottlenecks where the process gets interrupted or slowed down? And do some tasks need to be completed more than once in a given process? All right, so let's talk about forms. So during the workflow analysis process, it's also vital to gather all of the paper forms used by the healthcare facility employees, because these forms will now be entered electronically into the EHR system. Understanding where and how the forms are used, as well as what information is collected and communicated, is an integral part of the workflow analysis. Now, some of the desired outcomes from the workflow analysis. Okay, is the facility... The workflow sequence serves the facility by setting realistic expectations for the software functions, the staff by streamlining processes and improving communication, and then the patient by coordinating treatment and improving the overall quality of administered healthcare. Workflow analysis should also reflect a sequence that aligns the organization's goals regarding the EHR. And so you have a couple more workflows that you can look through in figure 13.3 on 360 and then 13.4 on 361. All right, moving on to our evaluation of EHR systems. So once a facility decides to purchase an EHR system, the steering committee begins the vendor selection process. Vendor selection must be thoughtful and include all necessary employee representatives. These department representatives may include management, health information staff, administrative staff, clinical staff, healthcare providers, and information technology staff. Making such an important decision regarding the EHR system should involve representatives from the entire organization. Now, depending on size, some facilities may choose to hire consultants to assist with the vendor selection process. One helpful suggestion is to think of working with an EHR system vendor as a long-term relationship. The healthcare facility must be certain that it can work effectively with the selected vendor because both parties will be entering a closely collaborative relationship. To determine if the EHR vendor fits the needs of the facility, the steering committee should consider several of these questions. And you can see the questions on 362, and they're also on slide 19. So a couple of these. Does the vendor have support staff, financial resources, and the capabilities to meet the organizational needs? Does the vendor offer functional and adaptive EHR product? Does the vendor manage ongoing maintenance and updates? So a lot of these key questions will help you determine whether or not that's going to be the right EHR system for you. Now, continuing on, I'm not seeing it in the slides here, so picking up in that last little section right underneath those questions on page 362, it says healthcare facilities have many choices when selecting an EHR system. They can choose to build their own. If they have a robust IT department, they certainly could build their own. They could use several applications from a variety of vendors. You know, if we want to choose this CPOE from this organization, but we want to use this clinical decision support from another system. But no matter which option a facility pursues, the organization must select a certified EHR system to receive those federal incentives. A best-of-breed EHR system is when the healthcare organization goes to market to find a vendor or vendors to supply the clinical applications needed. The healthcare facility then chooses various vendors evaluated to be the best in a particular area of healthcare and integrates them into an entire EHR system. So they are going out and they are picking various vendors to be the best, and they're going to integrate them into their EHR system. Now, features of an EHR system include your ONC certification, operating system, web-based or on-site servers, backup, downtime, and disaster recovery, data management and reporting systems, meaningful use attestation, functionality, security, interoperability, payer interface, license agreement, and maintenance and support. Now over on page 363, getting into meaningful use. So we've talked about meaningful use several different times as the past 2 years have gone on. And so to qualify a system as succeeding in this standard, a practitioner must demonstrate that the EHR system is used in significant and a measurable manner by attesting to the meaningful use requirements. Now, when you are choosing your vendor, they want to have an online or an on-site demonstration. You want to see the EHR system based on previously developed assessment tools. So if you go to figure 3.5 over on page 364, you have a vendor rating tool there. So once your steering committee has looked at different vendors, they've had them come on site, and then they've graded them. They can use, again, a form similar to this vendor rating tool, and they pick their top few. Then they're going to send out a request for proposal. So this is typically executed near the end of the vendor selection process. The request for proposal includes requirements, services, vendor information, and a bid or a quote for the EHR system. So after the committee recommends the top 3 EHR systems, the hospital or the system is going to send an RFP to each of those vendors. The facility and its committee receive system requirements and services along with bids or quotes from the vendors and compare each of them. After the committee selects the EHR system, the healthcare facility enters an agreement with your chosen vendor. All right, moving over to 366, let's get into the cost of ownership. These things are not cheap. So your cost of ownership is more than just the actual purchase price of your EHR. You've got to examine all of the relative cost to making an informed decision. You got to talk about accounting, opportunity, and economic cost. Excuse me. So your accounting cost is the total amount of money paid out for products, goods, or services. The accounting cost of an EHR system includes the hardware, which is servers or your actual workstations, or if you need scanners, any other type of hardware that you would need, printers, software, productivity loss, because things will slow down once you transition from what you've done for years to doing something new, a new process. The actual implementation, ongoing technical support, and your software licenses. So the accounting cost is the direct cost of the EHR system. Now, opportunity cost is the value of a decision. Something must be given up for the benefit of something else. So, for instance, an opportunity cost could include the consequences of not implementing an EHR system and losing patients to healthcare facilities that have one. In your accounting worksheets, they're not going to show opportunity cost because that's just not truly quantifiable. And then you have your economic cost. This is a combination of accounting and opportunity cost. It includes the cash outlays related to the actual implementation, and then is what is given up following the EHR implementation decision. And if we keep going, we do have some additional considerations, financial considerations. We may need to hire more staff that are trained in health informatics. Again, that productivity slowdown is going to make everything a little bit slower, but if we have some people that are well versed in healthcare informatics or in technical support to help train the employees that we have, we may also need to do more workflow analysis because those are going to be expensive too. And then, of course, we have to provide training. We have to train all of our staff. If you have a facility that has 3,000 employees, each one of those employees most likely has to be trained if they have access to the EHR and their job requires them to use the electronic health record. And then, again, you're going to have data dictionaries. You're going to have templates created, developed, reviewed. And then, again, other factors are going to be, again, hardware, software, implementation and training. That's going to be the cost of installation, the build, testing, training with the EHR system. Then you've got maintenance. You have to pay yearly for the actual software itself. And then you have upgrades. And then again, you've got to have support if something goes wrong. And then again, training, customization. You have downtime and recovery. So depending on the type of your EHR system, whether it's web-based or an on-site server, the vendor should communicate its plans for downtime and data backup and storage, whether that's storage on a cloud or online, disk, tapes, things like that. Now, let's talk about return on investment. So when you're making your decision about implementing your EHR system, the facility has to have some way to perform a cost-benefit analysis to determine that return on investment. So your return on investment is a performance measure that calculates the benefit or gain from an investment. They'll need to pinpoint the payback period by comparing cash flow, which is cash inflow minus your cash outflow, with the cost of the investment to determine how long it's going to take to achieve a positive difference. If the payback period is longer than 5 years, then it may not be worth it. But if the payback period is going to be in the next 2 years, then it definitely should be worth it. Now, internal rate of return and net present value should also be calculated. Internal rate of return is a calculation used to measure the profitability of an investment. So in this case, we're talking about an EHR system. The net present value is the present value of future cash flows minus the purchase price of goods or services. So your net present value measures the excess or shortfall of cash flows once your financial obligations have been met. So if the IRR, internal rate of return, or NPV, net present value, for an EHR system is greater than the IRR or an NPV of other EHR systems, then the EHR is considered a good investment. Most vendors provide an ROI analysis. However, this analysis requires a careful interpretation of the results. Because again, if the vendor is supplying this to you, they're going to make it look exceedingly well so that, you look at it and think, man, there's no reason we shouldn't go with this. But you really do have to kind of dig into that and make sure that what they're providing you is the truth. All right, let's move down to slide 27. We're at the middle of 368, talking about the cost versus benefit of an EHR implementation. Now, the cost and benefits associated with the EHR implementation depend on a number of factors. So to meet meaningful use, healthcare facilities must make an investment, and depending on the type of healthcare facility, the total cost is going to vary. A small community hospital, they may spend $3 million. A medium-sized facility may spend 10 to 15, and a large hospital system could spend up to $100 million. Now, the size of the facility, complexity of the practice, implementation strategy, and types of services offered or performed are going to factor in the total cost of the EHR implementation. Now, the benefits of the EHR use depend on a variety of factors in the areas of efficiency, finance, quality, and compliance. Now, in efficiency, we're going to be looking at reduction in duplicate tests. Our EHR is going to help us ensure that we're not doing the same test over and over again. We're going to increase accuracy in patient information. In financial, again, we're going to decrease our malpractice insurance costs because we're not handing out meds nilly-willy. We have documentation backing it up that's easy to see in that EHR system. Quality, we're going to have those reminders that we need about preventative care. We're going to eliminate ineligible medication prescriptions. And in compliance, we're going to have reports, and we're going to determine eligibility for our Medicare and Medicaid programs. So be familiar with those benefits in each of those areas there. All right, moving over to 369, talking about EHR implementation. Now, implementation is as important as the selection of the EHR system. One of the factors that often contributes to implementation failure is fear and lack of support from management. Therefore, leadership is an essential aspect of implementation. The steering committee of the facility must identify leaders in each department who will champion the EHR system. These leaders should encourage adaptability and flexibility in their discussions with coworkers and act as a link between the departments and steering committee to provide staff feedback and suggestions for implementation. And now with the EHR system selected and your project manager is in place, the implementation plan has been created, well, now our rollout process can begin. The rollout process is going to happen in 3 phases. We have an organizational phase, a training phase, and an operational phase. Now, for our organizational phase, this entails the plan for installation of the EHR system. This is usually complete once the rollout begins. The healthcare organization selects a cutoff date, which determines how many years the health organization will go back and convert paper records. For example, the facility may choose to go back for 5 years, and all of those years of records will be digitally converted to the EHR. Now, In the training phase, this is when we're learning and fine-tuning, customizing, and testing the EHR system. Now, when we are still in our operational phase and that ends, then we're going to launch into the system and we're going to have training while maintenance begins. Now, prior to a go-live date, our testing related to hardware, software, networking, connectivity, recovery are essential. I cannot tell you how many thousands of hours I spent at work testing the same thing, seemed like 50,000 times, just to make sure that it truly worked the way it was supposed to work. Now, in preparation of go live, many of the testing processes noted above occur in a test environment prior to facility-wide rollout. Now, I can attest to this. We had a test system for my document imaging system. So anytime there were software updates or new releases or new features, we would put that into our test environment and I would test. And not only would I test the new things that were available once an upgrade happened, I had to go back and test everything. Will a document scan the way it did before? Can I easily name my documents in the quality control process? Can I go view my documents? Can I scan my documents? Or can I fax my documents? Can I print my documents? All of the things that happen in that system on a daily basis, you have to go back and test all of that over and over and over again. Now, continuing in that operational phase, so our rollout process ends in that operational phase. This is the actual launch of the EHR system and the continual training while maintenance begins. And then most of the time, talking about picking a go-live date. Go-live date is the date where you say, okay, we're moving over to the system. This is what we're going to do starting this date. Usually sometimes there may be a pilot. And if you've ever heard of a pilot, it could be that, okay, we'll just use a single document as an example. Instead of rolling that whole document out across the whole facility, we may start that pilot on one nursing unit. So 6 South may be our pilot floor, and they may test the new note. And basically what you're doing is you're trying to identify any issues or problems before rolling it out, hospital-wide. If we determine, oh God, this is terrible, we can't use this, we got to go back and tweak this, we've only affected one floor. We've not affected the whole hospital. All right, now we've got a preparation phase here. So a few weeks prior to the go-live, all staff members should be trained. And again, training is going to happen on the job as well, because let's say you go out and you train staff for a month and they don't touch it for a month until go live. Well, they're going to be running around like chickens with their head cut off. So you have to have continual training, but you do want to give them access to a test environment so that they do get that hands-on practice prior to go live. Now, on your go live date, again, I talked about doing pilots. You could do pilot, you could do slow rollouts to where, you start with one function of an EHR system, and then slowly you start adding more functions of your EHR system. And this will allow it to kind of stagger so that you can resolve issues and get feedback from individual features. Then you can also do the Big Bang approach. You're going to use all of the EHR functionality immediately. All users use everything. Now, this will speed up implementation, but it can cause risk of multiple problems or delays if there's something actually wrong with the system. And then again, it's very important that every member of the organization is prepared for the go-live date. Now, if they're using a commercial product, then the vendor is usually going to have a customized checklist. They're going to determine provider schedules, planning downtime to catch up, informing users where they can go to get help. Some places will set up a command center, and they'll have a command line that you can call if you have questions. Or places where you can go to get additional training. And then there's going to be a planning for an end of the day briefing. these are all the problems we've come up with, with users throughout the system. These are the things we've been able to fix. These are the things that we still have in support. We've got the developers working on these. So you've kind of got that sense of where you are each day once you've hit your go live date and you've started using the system. Okay, so all that's left now is our chapter summary. It's relatively short in the book, so I'm going to go ahead and read it out of page 371. So the transition from paper health records to electronic health records can be a challenge. Each organization must be thoughtful as it determines how to initiate this process. A healthcare organization must first assess its readiness to adopt an EHR system before it selects a system to meet its needs. The organization should form a steering committee, set goals, and create a migration plan. A migration plan should identify the EHR requirements, create a design, analyze current systems, should identify the test the new system, and set an implementation date for the EHR system. The committee should also conduct workflow analysis for each area of the organization and prepare a cost-benefit analysis to present to the administration. The return on investment should be calculated to determine the benefit or gain of the investment in the EHR system. Once these initial steps have been taken, the steering committee should then review potential vendors based on the organization's criteria. These vendors should be selected by reviewing a list of the EHR systems that have been certified for functionality, interoperability, and security by the Office of National Coordinator for Health Information Technology. They may use vendor demonstrations and issue proposal requests to help them select an EHR system. Upon system selection, it's necessary to establish a rollout process and a go-live date. Internal leaders from all areas of the organization are necessary to champion the newly selected system and enhance buy-in. A healthcare organization that follows this process enhances the probability of successful EHR implementation. So again, be familiar with your acronyms and initialisms at the end of the chapter. Again, we did cover a lot of this chapter, but again, go back and read again, because again, this is going to be 40 questions of your final exam. So you want to be well versed in this chapter because, this is going to be a test within your test as far as your final exam is concerned. So good luck and